Hey everyone, I'm Matt Cremona.
And I'm Matthew Morris.
And welcome to the Matt and Matthew Show. It's just us today, just the two of us, and we're going to talk a little bit about angled joinery. But first, Matthew, I've been following this really awesome build of yours on Instagram of this sweet rocking chair. Tell me more about that thing, because I think that's going to lead us into the discussion about angled joinery.
Well, thank you, Matt. Yeah, I've been working on this Gamble House living room rocking chair, and it has got angled joinery all over the place. So I have a whole bunch of stuff here on my assembly table that's been helping me do all this angled work. But let me talk about the chair real quick. So the chair, the front legs are parallelograms, which means that if you add up all four sides, you still get 360 degrees. However, they are angled, so these faces are parallel and these faces are parallel, but they're not all square to each other. And so this whole chair is angled in at 6 degrees. So the joints on the front of the rails and the two sides of the stretcher, or the front stretcher and the rear stretcher, are all cut at 6 degrees. However, because it's a rocking chair and I needed the rear legs to be splayed, they are a little bit different. So as the rail enters into the rear leg, this joint here is actually cut straight because I've already tilted the leg at 6 degrees. But because I did that, I needed to cut the joinery up here on top on the crest rail at 6 degrees as well, but in the opposite direction, so that these two faces would be parallel to each other, so that when I cut the slip tenon, the mortises for the slip tenon on the crest rail, that they would be nice and straight. And so there's a whole bunch of just thinking through all the steps, and part of what helped me do this was actually modeling the chair in SketchUp, and then creating actual templates and real two-dimensional or three-dimensional pieces. Like here's a rear leg that I used. There's another one that I used, but here's a full bore one where I actually wanted to visualize the whole part before I actually did the work, just so I would know if what I was thinking, how to approach it, was actually going to be work. So that was pretty cool, but there's angled stuff all over here. Now Matt, you're working on something for Little Cremona. I'm not quite sure if you guys have picked the name out or not, even though the sex. I don't remember if you do or not, but your piece there has a whole bunch of angled joinery as well. So why don't you talk to us about that?
So yeah, I'm making a Vasa Net for our baby that will be, well, it's due in July and we don't know the sex yet. We're going to wait to find out, so it's going to be a pretty cool surprise.
So instead of getting something blue or pink, should I just get you something in the middle, like, you know, purple or something?
Well, my favorite color is pink, so regardless of the gender of the baby, I'll still be happy.
Oh, well, your favorite color is pink?
My favorite color is pink.
Well, congratulations. Mine's orange. So tell us about this Vasa Net, Matt.
So this is one of the side assemblies, and it's going to have a rocker on the bottom. As you can see, I have just a big block on there right now, and that'll turn into the magic of television. That'll turn into something like this with an actual rocker on it. Now the joinery on this is all Morris and Tenons, just like yours is. I think, are yours all loose tenons?
No, the only loose tenon I have is in the crest rail. The rest of it is all mortise and tenon joints. But I cut them on the mortises on a router, and I left them round at the end.
Okay, cool. So these are all also mortise and tenon, but they're all integral and they're all rectangles, you know, squares. And this is, and it's only splayed in one angle too, so it's kind of nice in that sense. So you're not dealing with a compound angle, which you could do if you wanted to, but this was probably I think this was my first like real entry into real compound, or not compound, just angled joinery in general. I've only done one project with two, a pair of angled Morris and Tenons before, but this was really like the first time I've done anything with a lot of angles on it. And I did mine a little differently than I think, well, I don't know if it's different than a lot of people do it, but I did it my own special way. So I laid out all of my angles on my pieces with my little bevel gauge, and I scribed a line all the way around it with a bevel gauge and a square, so I had a nice shoulder line that wrapped all the way around that piece, and that was a perfect shoulder line for that tenon. And then from there, I went to my table saw, and I set my dado blade in there, and I set my miter gauge to, roughly what this angle is. It wasn't that big of a deal because I was just using my dado blade to remove the bulk of the material to get that tenon to be roughly the same size as the mortise that I had made, and the mortises here are square, or they're perpendicular to the face. And then with that shoulder line, I can come back to the bench and use my chisels to just pare back along that shoulder line to make that shoulder perfectly in the right plane all the way around the tenon, and that's how I made mine, and that worked out really well. I didn't have to worry about having a miter gauge that would be able to swing to both sides of 90 at the same angle, which mine isn't set up that well. I just have a stock one for my table saw, and it does not accurately swing to both sides of 90, and you could set up some kind of jig or something to set that angle every single time you want to make those cuts, but I found it to be really easy and really simple just to come back to the bench and just pare back to that line, and it just fit perfectly the first time.
Makes sense, makes sense. So why don't you, I obviously just talked to us about your process. So what tools helped you? You talked about the bevel gauge. What else were you using to help you out in your process?
Yeah, a lot of it was really just having a marking knife, because that was probably the, it sounds kind of dumb to say that, but that's really the biggest thing that made this possible, was that marking knife. By having a marking knife that can give me a nice knife line all the way around all four sides of the piece, that gives me a perfect shoulder line for that entire tenon, that was probably the most key element to doing this. And one thing I think we could probably talk about tooling, because we're talking about that already, is the actual bevel gauge. Now, this is a cheap, big box store bevel gauge, and unfortunately for me, and I didn't realize it as I was doing this, a couple of times this happened, is this angle changed. I don't know, however that happened, I don't know, I put it down on its side, I bumped it, whatever. This changed. I didn't realize it until I cut my joints. I went to go put it together, and I couldn't figure out why the shoulders down on like the mid rail here wouldn't close, because the top one was closed, but this should be the right length, but it didn't. It had a gap there. Well, the angle on the tenon on the top was off by, just a little bit, and that just got, obviously that compounds as you go down this angled leg here. So that was super annoying. So every single time, after that happened, probably I think twice, every time I went to go lay out a new one, I checked it every single time against one of the previous ones I already did, because these angles are all the same. The only difference is the length of the rails. That's the only thing that's going to change, but man, that was really annoying. So if I do any more angled joinery, I'm going to look for something that locks down a little bit better than this, because I think I'm done with all these, so I can start playing with this. So even if I just push a little bit, it moved. That wasn't even that much, and it moved. So this is not a reliable tool for this, and I've learned my lesson now.
Well, it's time to get a better bevel gauge then. You need to go get one of those Vesper, the guy from Vesper Tools, one of his.
I would love that. I saw those at Woodworking in America last year. They were so amazing. They're just so perfectly machined, and they just lock in perfectly, and they're just the most perfect tool. Probably a little outside my budget for a bevel gauge, but I can appreciate the quality and the time that goes into making one of those things for sure.
So that was pretty much it for you. So I guess I'm just like overdoing it here, because I have an assembly table full of stuff. So I have some bevel gauges here as well. And so originally I purchased, a long time ago, I have this crown bevel gauge. I have a smaller crown, and I've stopped using this one entirely, because it locks with this little guy here in the front, and whenever I want to make it really tight, it's always extending out of the body, and it's always in the way. So, helicopter flying over. really low too.
We'll take a break for some technical difficulties.
So since then, I upgraded back to our original show, right? Maybe I should have gone here in the beginning. Maybe I should have jumped to a Vesper bevel gauge, but didn't know any better then. But I have the Veritas one, and this guy locks in the middle, which is really nice. You're still able to move it, so you gotta watch out for that, just like you were talking about before. But it does have a flathead screw here on the front, where you can get this a little bit tighter if you need to, if it ever becomes loose. But kind of, at least my approach to this is, when I first cut the front legs, I use this Woodpecker's angle reference aluminum sheet here of all they have 1 degree, half angle, and quarter angle degrees. But I referenced what I wanted, which was 6 degrees off of this, set up all of my machinery, and then cut these front legs. And whatever that ended up to be, I kept referencing the front legs to pull the same angle whenever I'd have to reset something up. So instead of coming back to this, I said, okay, I'm shooting for 6. Whatever ends up to be, that's what it's gonna be. But then I'll come back here and then just grab that angle every single time. So now I'm working off of reality instead of off of a piece of aluminum that, I may be off by a half a degree or something on the table saw, but here is what it was when I cut it.
That's a big point, more than anything right there, is referencing off the same thing every time and not always going back to like setting it up to something different every time, which is, if I just go on a little tangent on mine here, I had intended this to be splayed at 10 degrees. That's what I had designed it in SketchUp at. It was 10 degrees. So I used my chop saw to cut my first angle, which was to cut the legs to length here at what I set it to, which was 10 degrees. Now that was actually more like 10 and change. It was like closer to 11 degrees actually, but didn't really matter because I was copying that angle with my bevel gauge anyway, and that became my master for all the other ones anyway. So again, I think that's a really good point, is working in reality. I think you really nailed it with that point right there.
Yeah, and that's something that I picked up from watching Tim Rousseau's videos on Fine Woodworking's website, is that he always tries to pull from reality. Like we talked about before, instead of using measurements on your plan, you do your overall stuff, you pull from reality, you see what's real and not what you want it to be. So with that, in the past, I used to also use this guy, which was this Incra Rule protractor. And you don't need something crazy like this Woodpecker's angle reference. You can just get, you don't even need an Incra protractor. A regular protractor will do just fine. And so at least then I could start to get that original angle I wanted, grab that, and always go back to my reference piece for that same angle. But that reference I did for the front legs helped me out with the rest of this stuff here too. So here's the tenoning jig, right? And with the tenoning jig, I'm not sure what setup it's in right now. I think it's just 90 all the way around, but this would get angled at 6 degrees or whatever that was off the leg. So I would cut my tenons at the table saw with my blade at 90, crossing my fingers, it was at 90, but I double checked that setup. I have an Incra, one of their accurate squares, and then feeler gauges, and I'd go down to the 1,000th of an inch feeler gauge. I'd make sure between the light test and the feeler gauge that nothing was getting through. So I was pretty confident I was really close to 90. And then with this guy, I set up my fences here using what I pulled from the legs. And then back to what you said before, Matt, which is a marking knife here. This is the Veritas one, doesn't matter what you're using. But because on the tenoning jig here, I can only cut 2 sides of the tenon. I can't cut the top and the bottom, the cheeks, right? I can cut the cheeks, but I can't cut the ears, I think is what the official term is. But I can't cut those on
side
here.
Cheeks.
Sure, side cheeks.
Or
short cheeks, big cheeks, small cheeks, whatever cheek. But so then I would use the bevel gauge referenced off my front leg, use my marking knife to mark and connect And sometimes, you know, if it was off by a little bit, which maybe just a touch, I would just set the bevel gauge actually off the piece, and then take the marking knife, connect those two sides, and then with a chisel down and back and down to that point, so I'd have a nice square face all the way around. So, and then I got even crazier, because I'm jig man over here, right? And so I used the router to cut my mortises on this guy. So this is a jig from Michael Fortune, and I love using this thing because I can set it up and then I can attach other jigs to this. So this guy, the router goes on top, I can cut straight down, and then with the front legs, for instance, since they're parallelograms, I made this piece out of mahogany, happened to be, and this is at the same angle as the front legs were cut, this angle here, and then it's back here at 90, and I can hold the front legs inside of this with clamps and they won't move. And you don't have to use a router jig like I use for this. You can also use a hollow chisel mortiser and push this against the fence and hold your piece against it to hold these parallelogram front legs. So just lots of different ways to approach this, I guess. Right, Matt?
Of course, it's woodworking. There's always a different way to do everything.
Yes, exactly. So what do you think you've learned the most so far? I think you answered the question already, but what do you think you've learned the most so far out of this being really your first major angle joinery project?
I don't think it's that hard. I mean, it's certainly, there's a little bit of a different approach and a little bit of a different, I don't know, way of working, I guess, to do this, at least, especially in the way that I did, because I did all that finesse work by hand, and I thought that was super easy. And I kind of got that push because last year at Woodworking in America, I took a class with Phil Lowe, and he was talking about angle joinery on a Queen Anne chair, and he did exactly that. He laid it out with the line with the knife. He wrapped that scribe line all the way around it with a bevel gauge and a square for the square edges, because it was just a single angle, or a single, it wasn't compound. He cut the rough side. He showed two ways to rough it out. He cut it with a handsaw to get rid of most of the material, and he also showed it with a table saw to get rid of most of the material. Both ways are really easy, just quick chop chop that cleans the cheek right out of there, and then all you have to do is pare back to that scribe line, and you have a nice tight shoulder line all the way around the piece. And seeing that in person, because I'd never seen it before. I've always seen people like fussing with their table saws, trying to get the angle on both sides of 90 to be exactly the same. And I mean, that's how I did it the first time, and it didn't work out the first time. So what did I end up doing? Well, I took my bevel gauge, set it to one of the shoulders, and then trimmed the other shoulder to that same angle so they matched all the way around. And I didn't really think about it at that time. Like, I could have done that the whole time for all four sides and been done with it. But I mean, overall, I thought it was a pretty easy, generally speaking, it was a pretty easy experience. And I certainly won't shy away from it in the future, because it really isn't that, it's not that complicated, really.
That's great, Matt. Phil Lowe's fantastic to start with. He definitely knows what he's talking about. And it's a real common sense kind of thing. Just get the bevel gauge, set it up at the angle you want to set it up at, and just transfer those lines and work back to the line. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
and you can even, if you really wanted to, you could do the same, you could do exactly the same thing with regular square joints as well. There's no reason why you couldn't do that on a square joint.
Absolutely, and I think if you've watched any of his stuff, and I have no doubt you have too, at least the movies he's done for Fine Woodworking, those projects, that's exactly what he does all the time, no matter what the project is he scribe lines it. He's not using a pencil. If he ever uses a pencil, it's only to, at least from what you can tell in the videos, it's just to make, after he's done the scribe, so the video camera can see where his scribe line is, and that's about it.
Yeah, just some rough layout work. I've seen him use it on like doing a cabriole leg when he was doing the shaping. He's put some rough guidelines in for the center line and then the two quarter lines, I guess, so we can see how much material is removing. But for actual joinery layout though, he's always using a knife. And that's kind of the way I've gone now too. I use knives. I use my knife for anything that's going to get severed.
So I guess what we're pulling out of this is just make sure you do great joinery layout, make sure everything's nice and precise, double check, and don't be intimidated by doing an angle joinery project. You know, people have been building chairs for, well, since man probably stood up, and at some point, right, they became angled, so the seat was shorter in the back, or as far as the width was, than in the front, and you know, people have been doing those projects ever since. So just go out and tackle it. Don't worry about it, just do it.
Now Matthew, one question I really wanted to ask you about the chair you're making now is, how does this one compare to the last one you made? This is a rocking chair and the other one was just a living room armchair, right? Is this exactly the same design, or is there any more like difficulty in this one besides because that was a rocker, or what?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's a good question. And there's a lot of similarities to the piece, but there's a lot of more complexities to this piece as well. So for instance, you know, it looks very similar because you got the cloud lift patterns on the rails and the stretchers. You got ebony pegs. The design in the crest rail is pretty much the exact same thing. The big differences happen where, yes, I have parallelogram front legs, but they're not, these are shaped. They came from a larger piece that had to get cut down to a smaller piece. On the armchair, it's just one parallelogram front leg, and you just kind of do a little bit of tapering at the top and the bottom. This is a whole bigger piece. And really the angle joinery completely changed on this one because the rear legs are splayed at an angle, which I happen to pick to be 6 degrees. So that added even more complexities up here in the crest rail that I talked about earlier. And then the rocker just adds a whole bunch of complexity in itself. You're trying to get it at the right seat height to match the radius of the rocker, and then just the weight distribution. And another big thing here was on the armchair, the arms are, they run parallel to the rails, but in this one, the arms are actually angled downward. So the front of the panel that's going to go here is taller in the front than in the back. And that's the same in the rocker, the original rocker. Now the armchair in the house, I do not believe is angled like that at all. So just some more complexities to the whole piece. So it looks the same, but really fundamentally it's just got lots of differences in it that just add up to a whole bunch of things that equal a brand new chair.
That's really cool. It's like, so it's pretty much almost like a whole new project in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Some stuff is, you know, the concepts or the executions may be the same, like doing a bent lamination form, but the angle from the rear stretcher to the crest rail is completely different, so it's got to be a different form. The rockers have their own form, so yeah, it really is a whole separate project, but it all, you know, comes together because it all has the same design elements to them. So fun stuff, crazy but fun stuff. But it's not something to be too over intimidated about. It's just back to what, you know, you were talking about before. But, you know, just more like, or one step at a time. Lay out the joinery, cut the joinery, make sure that your layout for one piece is the same in the other, and you can definitely accomplish this project.
That's awesome. And if anyone's not aware, Matthew does offer classes teaching this exact process of how to make exactly that chair, or any of his past projects as well. So if you want to take a look at that, you can have a look at his website. You can sign up and you can watch him and work along with him as he builds all these cool things. I think that's a really awesome thing you have going there for sure.
Well, thank you for the plug, Matt. And in case you guys didn't know, Matt sells an amazing amount of lumber, and his lumber is really cool because you have the whole story from cutting down the tree to it being delivered on your doorstep. And you can put those whole things together. So if you want to build something for your family or a client or something, you can say, I know where this tree was cut, I know who milled it, and the reasons why it was milled a certain way, and I bought the wood for that. So he'll even ship to you. I'm not sure about Hawaii and Alaska, but you got to talk to him about that one. So I think we pretty much covered what we wanted to cover today, Matt. How about you?
I don't know what we wanted to cover.
Well, we wanted to cover angle joinery, Matt.
Yeah,
Or at least give an overview of it.
I think so. I think it was a great little discussion on the different ways of accomplishing pretty much the same thing. And again, if you guys have questions about angle joinery, feel free to leave some questions down below and all that. Maybe send Matthew a lot of emails. He likes answering questions about angle joinery, especially from everybody.
Thanks, Matt. And guys, really appreciate you watching the show. Trust us, we're working really hard on getting some great new guests. We're not going to tell you who those are yet because we're still working on things, but I think we have some really cool stuff lined up over the rest of the year, at least taking us out to the September or October or so, hopefully. Knock on a whole bunch of wood. And as always, please subscribe to the channel. And you can find me at mmwoodstudio.com. And Matt, where can they find you?
You can find me and everything that I do at mattcremona.com.
And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
All right, see ya.
See ya.